Good evening, and welcome to the first annual meeting of the Fruit Bay Region Health and Wellness Foundation. My name is Dan Jansen. I want to introduce our current officers that are operating on a pro tem basis. And as I read your names, I'm going to ask you to please stand. First is Patty Siebold, our president. Mary Connolly and Alice Grant, our secretaries. Margaret Parrott is our treasurer. And as I said, my name is Dan Jansen, and I'm acting vice president. So we've got a lot of things planned for this evening, and we might as well get on with it. So I'm going to turn it over to our president, Patty Siebold.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so hopefully you have, either you have or a neighbor has a copy of the agenda. As you can see, the first thing we're going to do is actually get over the business meeting part of our annual meeting and ask you to help us elect our next board slate. So Jane, if you and some folks could pass those out while we're getting on with it. Let me just tell you a little bit of background about the foundation. You all know, I think, that this arose out of the Safe St. Andrews Task Force, a group of us who were working on that project. And we had so much fun working together and learning a lot that we kept going. And what you'll hear tonight are both our Safe St. Andrews efforts and our ongoing efforts to really revitalize health and wellness on this peninsula with your help. We're all in it together, and I'm delighted to see such a great turnout. So our mission, the Foundation's mission, you see up here, promote the health and wellness of all residents, visitors, and those who have ties to the community. And our vision is to have an empowered, informed, healthy community with local, affordable, accessible resources. And a very proactive support network to keep everybody happy and healthy. So we're not just about health, we're also about wellness and social services and trying to fill the gaps. The one other thing I'd like to say about the foundation and its charter is that we do not plan to run anything. We have no employees. We hope never to have any employees. Our goal is to, with your help, identify the gaps on this peninsula and fill those gaps with organizations that are either already here and may need more support, like the ambulance service, or FISH, the folks who do volunteer driving for medical appointments, or to, with your help, find things that need to be done and aren't being done, and then help basically jumpstart a local organization to do that. But it's all about local here, employing local folks to serve our own community and also getting the volunteer spirit that we have, harnessing that. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce. Okay, yeah, if you haven't passed out the board slate, please do so, because we're going to be voting on that very soon. But first, we're going to get a quick financial update from our treasurer, Margaret Perry.
I thought you would just go look at the pie chart and figure it out for yourself. And we have pie charts. As you can see, we have, as of today, $71,933 in income. It's your fault. You did it. Anyway, we started out with $10,000 from the task force, and all the rest of it has come in through contributions, our raffle, memberships, and memorial funds that have been given in memory of Robin Fairman. And our expenses to date have been $64,589. The vast majority of that went for professional fees, lawyers, and some advertising, printing, postage, and other. So there we are.
So don't go away, Margaret, because the next thing we need to do is to say thank you to Dan and Smith Climo. I'd appreciate it if you would both come up and let us thank you for being on the board during this important formative period from January to now. And both Dan and Smith have decided to focus on other things, and you'll hear some more about those later. So Margaret, would you like to do the honors?
So we're giving them our heart.
Okay, and with that lovely ceremony, we are now going to ask you, the members, the voting members, to vote on this slate of board members. So it's not one or the other, it's all of us. And most of us, we just saw that we had 2 people who are moving on, but the rest actually chose to stay. We had 16 people on our board, and we filled those 2 slots plus 1, so we now have 17 people who have said, I want to do this work. This is really important to me. So, you have in front of you hopefully many of you, okay, there's some more coming actually, but you'll be able, those of you who have the copies, we'll be passing some more along. We'll be able to see a little bit about these people, so you can see how varied a group we are and how the different kinds of expertise that we bring to the party. So I wonder if, actually I'm going to turn this over to Dan because I can't elect myself. So maybe you can ask for a motion.
Okay, you have the list of the candidates. Could I have a motion?
I move that the board be accepted by acclamation.
We have a motion that the board be accepted by acclamation.
Second.
Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed?
Right. That was easy.
Okay, so thank you very much. That actually concludes the business meeting part of this meeting. And we don't have any minutes to review with you because, of course, this is our first annual meeting. Now we're going to move into the rest of the next part of the agenda, which is really the first 4 sections are about St. Andrews. And I know many of you came to hear about our Save St. Andrews initiative and how we're doing and where we are with that. So we're going to start with Margaret Parrott.
My sons are musicians, and they keep telling me that with the voice mic, you point the bottom end of it where you want your voice to go. So is it working? I need to stand. First of all, before I start, I would like to thank Hannaford's for donating those lovely apples that you saw in the back of the room. You know, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Sorry, doctors. And also, we would like to acknowledge that the Booth Bay Region Railway Village has donated the use of the hall to us tonight, so we thank them for that as well. You remember, we all remember how the word spread throughout the community like a huge ink blot. Overheard in the vegetable section of Hannaford's. It was as if Lincoln County Healthcare had dropped a glass on a stone floor, and the shards sprayed all over the place. We could not believe it, nor accept it, and they could not put it back together and make it right. We were at war. You've heard the story over and over. You know what we did, but just so you get the picture, here it is. We created the task force. We had weekly public meetings. You're all going to get a little piece of it. We had weekly public meetings. The meetings were replayed on Channel 7 for those who could not or chose not to attend. We formed working groups. We held office hours. We hired a lawyer. We raised money to pay the lawyer. We visited 13 critical access hospitals. We interviewed people and gathered the history of St. Andrews. We had community suppers. We put donation cans around town. We wore our hearts everywhere, on our bumpers, in our yards, on power poles, on our clothing, and on our Christmas trees. We hired a consultant. We raised money to pay the consultants. We gathered local health statistics and did needs assessments. We did strategic planning. We negotiated with Lincoln County Health and Maine Health. We wrote letters to the Attorney General. That card says, "Dear Janet." We petitioned at the polls. We formed a foundation. We had votes at town meetings. We met with the Attorney General. We raised more money. We mounted legislation. We testified in Augusta. The task force handed the baton over to the Booth Bay Region Health and Wellness Foundation, and we hired more lawyers. We did legal research. We met with the governor. We did a population health study. We wrote letters to legislators. We wrote letters to Medicare. We did strategic planning. We lobbied regulators. We did extensive media outreach. We talked with trustees. And we hired more lawyers. This is our history, yours and ours. In August, of 2012, Maine Health awakened a sleeping giant, and we are not going away. We have been diligent in our efforts, and we have created a strong community of caring healthcare activists. We will not be silent from now on. We will continue to watch out for one another.
You all have a piece of it, by the way. Thank you.
Okay, so we did all that work.
We're not talking about the volunteers. You know, I wanted to tell you one thing.
You have the cost thing. If, let's assume there were 50 volunteers, and each of us worked 5 hours a week for a year at $22.40 an hour, which is what the federal government allows you to claim for volunteer work. That means that we have given $5,600 each of us to you. So, and we're happy to do it, and we'll keep on.
Okay, so we thought that the next thing that really needs to be talked about is what happened. How did we lose control of St. Andrews, of our hospital? So the first thing I want to point out, and I should preface this by saying that I've spent the last year, and in particular the last month and a half, as a paralegal, gathering a lot of information from all sources to try to really understand what happened and to understand the history. And the first thing that I realized that's very sobering is we all think that the hospital is our hospital, that it belongs to us, the community, because we think the Gregory family gave it to us. But they didn't. The Gregory family started the hospital as a private corporation, and then it became a not-for-profit corporation. The original incorporators included Phil Gregory and also Walter Bazell, who happened to be the guy who also started the YMCA and who owned my house. So I think I inherited his karma somehow. So it was started as a non-profit corporation in 1955. The property and the buildings on which the original hospital was built were given to not the town, but to the corporation for $1. So St. Andrews doesn't belong to us. St. Andrews belongs to a non-profit corporation that has a board of directors. And now let's talk about all of the missteps or all of the decisions that board made that we may not agree with. And as one board member said to me, I think we made a lot of decisions that were wrong, but I don't think we made any decisions that were illegal. So these are the milestones, essentially, in the history that I'd like to just talk about. The first one is this definitive agreement with what was then Maine Medical Center Foundation became later Maine Health. The thing that you'll notice about every single one of these decisions is that every single one was driven by the need to optimize reimbursement. That's the game in healthcare. So it's not just about the money, it's about how do we get the best reimbursement for the services we're providing. That's what the board members were focused on at every step of the way. So at the very beginning, what happened was we had this hospital, it was trucking along just fine from the 50s into the 90s. There was a third-party management company, Quorum Health Corporation, Hospital Corporation of America's Quorum division, that actually was managing it for a few years, up until the 96 timeframe. And when that contract expired, the board wanted, A, to have their own CEO and their own management team, but B, they were very concerned about insurance reimbursement. They were having a lot of trouble getting the big commercial insurance providers to actually certify St. Andrews Hospital as a small rural hospital as an organization they could reimburse. So it was our board members, two of our board members, the chairman and the treasurer at the time, who went to Bob McDowell at Maine Health and said, can you help? So we approached them and we asked them for help. And part of the reason we did was because we already had an affiliation with Maine Medical we were part of their purchasing system and part of their legal system, so that we could get lower prices when we were purchasing things. So we already had that business relationship, and the board members took the next step and they said, if we joined with you in an affiliation, then are we correct in assuming that the insurers would just rubber stamp us and we would not have any trouble getting commercial insured customers to be able to get reimbursement? And of course, with all of our seasonal people a lot of them have insurance companies from all over the country. So this is not a trivial matter. So that's what drove it. And I think the main issues about that affiliation are, first of all, it was actually a merger. Hospitals, nonprofit hospitals do this all the time. They affiliate with each other, and what, in many cases, what it is actually a merger. So St. Andrews became a subsidiary of Maine Health. All of its assets, all of its buildings, all of its people, essentially, are a subsidiary that belongs to now Maine Health. And there was no money that changed hands. It was just, here, please help us, we'll align with you. And there was a clause in that agreement that talked about the emergency services and exactly what they should be, and said that only the board, the St. Andrews board, could actually decide that they weren't going to be carrying on those services anymore. And there was also an amendment made to this agreement after the fact, a very important one, that basically said, if we have trouble with this affiliation and we want to terminate it, we should go into mediation, but in order for us to sever our ties, both boards, the Board of St. Andrews and the Board of Maine Health, have to agree. So that's the problem that really got started, is we ended up in an affiliation that is almost impossible to unravel without both boards doing that. And then there was a little PS in the addendum, in the agreement, that said, and oh, by the way, we're also in conversation with Miles Memorial, and if we do an affiliation with them, we would like St. Andrews and Miles to play nice together. We want you guys to share resources and services and rationalize services wherever possible for the benefit of Lincoln County. So that was really the biggest, that's where it all started, and that was probably the thing. If we could redo anything, that's what we should have redone.
When did that happen?
That was in 1997. So if you think about what happened since then, I'm not going to go through the whole history, but the little green arrow indicates that things actually were percolating along pretty well. And I would call this the Peggy Pinkham era. Peggy couldn't be here tonight, but she's was responsible in 1999 for getting that Medicare critical access designation, critical access hospital designation for St. Andrews, which allowed it to get higher reimbursement from Medicare. She was also, she and the board were very instrumental in basically raising the money and building St. Andrews Village, St. Andrews Retirement Community. And also, it was under her reign that a big capital campaign happened. $6 million were raised from the community to build a new wing on St. Andrews. And of course, there were lots of great services and lots of great doctors all through that period. Then, in about 2006, maybe even late 2005, there were some conversations that took place, and it does not look to me as if Maine Health actually started this. I believe it was actually started by Miles' management team approaching the St. Andrews management team and saying, we're thinking about a new hospital. And you've all heard this story about, the fact that this group looked at the possibility of building a shiny new hospital on Route 1, either in Edgecombe or Newcastle or somewhere along there. And I always thought that that was something that Maine Health was basically saying, you guys go do this. But that's not so. What actually happened, as I said, is the Miles management was really looking for the idea of maybe doing a new hospital. They got together with the St. Andrews management and board, and they put together a strategic planning committee that consisted of board members and management team members from both organizations, and they spent 18 months working together to try to figure out if they could do this new hospital. And at the end of that 18 months, they concluded that it didn't make sense. It would be much too expensive. It would cost about $88 million. And it would not provide more affordable health care or more accessible health care. So they said, okay, that's not going to work. But one of the things we realized in working together is that we could save some money and some effort if we had a shared governance model. So why do we need two of everything? Why do we need two CEOs, two CFOs, etc.? Let's put one management team in place and let's begin to rationalize which expensive machinery is at which campus, which hospital, and see if we can work well together. Now, at the time, the board members who were working on this, one of the issues that they realized was that there's a big cultural difference between the doctors and the culture at Miles and the doctors and the culture of St. Andrews. And several of the board members said, this is not going to work. These people do not get along particularly well. They have a very different view of the world and how they treat patients and what they're, optimizing for. And even if we do this on paper, it's really not going to work. But they all looked at it and, thought about it and decided, well, it probably does make the most sense. Financially, it probably makes the most sense from a business standpoint. And so in 2007, there was a very important board meeting in which the St. Andrews board voted to basically move into the shared governance model. It wasn't a merger, but it was 10 people from St. Andrews board and 10 people from the Miles board formed the Lincoln County Healthcare Board. And you've all heard the stories of the 3 boards, etc. And there were people who dissented, but it did pass on both the 10-person, on the existing St. Andrews board as well as on the Miles board. And one of the board members made a very important motion in that meeting in which he said, we need to resolve that the emergency room services, the 24-hour emergency room services at St. Andrews will be retained. We can't let go of that. And they unanimously agreed. But it was a non-binding resolution, and there is still the clause that says, at any time the board decides that we don't need ER services, the board has the ability to do that. So the next big harbinger of where we are, and the way Peggy Pinkham puts it, this is when the communities should have started getting very angry. But the problem is that the way this was communicated to us was basically a few current patients of St. Andrews got a notice that said, essentially, we've moved to a hospitalist program at Miles Memorial because we think it's better for the primary care physicians to be able to see all of their patients during the course of the day and not have to keep running over the hospital. So we'll have a hospitalist who takes care of the patients in the hospital, and that hospitalist will coordinate well with your primary care physician. And because we only have hospitalists at Miles, we won't be doing acute care admissions at St. Andrews unless the primary care physician decides to make an exception and will basically babysit that patient themselves, which several of them did. And it happened to be the case that when the Medicare survey came through, and it's like a bank audit. They don't tell you they're coming, but they come to check to make sure you're in compliance with their critical access regulations. It happened that Alan Barker and some others had actually admitted some acute care patients. So at the time Medicare came through, there were like 3 or 4 acute care patients in those beds, and so even though they had kind of gone against protocol, it was a good thing because they were able to keep that critical access designation. So acute care moved to Miles, and the real reason behind it was reimbursement. There was higher reimbursement for each acute care patient at Miles Memorial, and higher reimbursement for what are called swing bed or rehab patients recovering but not needing acute care treatment at St. Andrews. So the board thought about this and they said, okay, it's not great, but we're going to have better reimbursement this way, so we'll do it. And then in 2012 were the last operations, the outpatient surgery. Got shut down and moved. And one of the reasons this is a particular problem is that outpatient surgery is usually one of the most profitable services for any hospital, particularly a small hospital. So when they took our outpatient surgery away, that was really the beginning of the end after the acute care. So it was really just kind of a slide. And apparently it wasn't done because the surgeons didn't want to come here and do surgery. They actually loved coming here to do surgery. But the anesthesiologist had left. And so they were faced with the choice of, do we recruit a new anesthesiologist at St. Andrews to do a few surgeries a week, or do we just send all the surgeries to Miles? And being the good business people they were, they decided they would keep everything at Miles. And of course, at the time, the director of medicine at Miles was an anesthesiologist. So that may have had something to do with it. So the one that got us all involved, of course, was the decision in 2012 to close the emergency room, and essentially that means closing all inpatient services as of October 1st and going to the urgent care. And the latest wrinkle on that is again a reimbursement one. The closing of the ER we've all debated forever, and Maine Health or Lincoln County Healthcare says it's about quality, not cost. It's about utilization. There aren't enough people, but we all know that we've had good quality care at that emergency room, that we don't need a full trauma center for an emergency room. We just need to be able to be diagnosed and stabilized and then correctly treated. And it's very important to us to have that local capability, and we'd be willing to pay for it if we could keep it. But we're not being given that choice because we don't own the hospital. In the last 6 months, there was a very clever young woman working in St. Andrews in the Medicare department, and she started looking through all the Medicare regulations, and she discovered, so this was not a top-down, planned way in advance idea. She discovered that if they could relocate St. Andrews Hospital to Damariscotta, just as if you're basically taking the hospital and moving it down the street, so just relocating it to Miles, take that license, that Medicare license, and move it to Miles, they would be able to have for both campuses higher reimbursement for Medicare. However, in order to do that, that means Miles has to essentially become St. Andrews and be a critical access hospital, which means it has to reduce the number of beds. And that's the thing that we, the foundation, have been fighting about over the last couple of months, including writing to Medicare and trying to make waves. And they've already received the provisional license to do this. There's another, a year from now, there will be a survey to determine whether or not they've met all of the requirements. And our concern is they may not. And if that's the case, Miles may lose its Medicare license. Not just its critical access license, but its Medicare provider license. So we've flagged that as a problem. We've let everybody on the boards know that it's a problem, and we presume they're working hard to deal with that. Okay, so that's the story of how we lost St. Andrews. And before we take questions and have discussion, I think it makes sense to just move right into the legal battles that we've fought, and then we'll kind of stop and let everybody ask questions. So, Jane.
Patty, can you go back to those numbers and explain to people that those 63 beds are currently all the beds in Lincoln County?
Right.
When this process takes place, there will only be 25
Right. These are,
beds.
thank you, Skip. These are all of the hospital beds in Lincoln County. There are nursing home beds as well. So 25 beds at St. Andrews, actually there are only 19 that were being used, 38 beds at Miles, which gives us 63, but as of October 1st, they have to be down to 25. So there will be 25 hospital beds available to Lincoln County residents. Thanks. Well, they're not licensed, they won't be licensed to keep them.
Well, where do they send the people?
Jeff Curtis has said if they run out of room, we can all go to Midcoast.
So are you saying that there are going to be 25 beds split between the two campuses?
No, they will not be split between the two campuses. They tried to do that. To be fair, they did ask if they could do that, and the Medicare regulations require the hospital beds to be in the same facility as the emergency room. So they are all co-located at Miles. So as you probably know, what's happening at St. Andrews is we will have the walk-in urgent care center, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and a brand new, bigger occupational and physical therapy space. That's what they're doing with that space. Okay.
All those rooms that don't have any beds in them.
The rooms that don't have any beds in them are being transformed into physical therapy spaces. So that work is going to start October 1st and go on until about the end of the year. So by January is when they expect they'll be opening up the new physical therapy space.
And there's enough physical therapy patients to justify all this new space that's being added?
Will they take more physical therapy patients? Is that
Will there be enough patients to justify all
Oh, that's a good question. Will there be enough patients to justify all that? Well, of course, what they're expecting to do is to move a lot of the physical therapy patients from Miles to come to St. Andrews. So we'll see whether that works or not. That's a very good question. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going on the legal front.
This has been a really interesting part of our journey. 5 law firms later. The first law firm that we contracted with was Kozak and Geyer in Augusta, and I think you all remember Julius Chigronowitz. He wrote our white paper for our breach of trust. And this law firm, every law firm specializes in, boy, we've gotten an education. This law firm specializes in healthcare administrative law, and that means that they help with certificates of need, they help with Medicare, and they do an awful lot of law in Augusta. Julius is still working with us. He's trying to help us track the Medicare and Medicaid thing through Boston and see how it's working its way through Augusta. He's helped us by negotiating with the governor's office. So he's still on board. We're still paying him. He works with Holly Lusk, who's the senior health policy advisor in the governor's office. But he said to us right flat out, I'm not a trial attorney. And we always love it when these lawyers are that honest. So we said, well, who would you suggest? So the first suggestion was with the law firm of Berman and Simmons in Lewiston. We met twice with William Robizek. And he was amazing. And his level of honesty was, this is such a juicy case, and I would really, really like to take this case. But he said it's like a boa constrictor swallowing a goat, and we can only swallow rats. He said, this is big. This is big. So, of course, we appreciated his honesty. But what he did for us was he earmarked the Lifespan case for us and made a huge folder about that. He compiled all our information, and he got us all set up for the next lawyer and suggested that recommended that we go to see Bruce Single of Donovan, Barrett, and Single in Boston. And this is the law firm that won the Lifespan case. the trustees were found in this case not to have fulfilled their fiduciary duties for people that they serve. But he advised us against trying to make this case, even if we could determine that we had a case, because the cost would be around $3 million, and it would take 3 to 5 years to litigate. So he thought we'd be better served using our donors fund to build a new healthcare facility. So he really denied taking our case. So then he suggested that we talk to the major lawyer in the Lifespan case that did most of the litigation in that case, which was David Wolin, now with Hinckley Allen in Providence, Rhode Island. He reviewed our information to find out if the situation differed from the Lifespan case. In the Lifespan case, the Massachusetts Attorney General was on the side of the plaintiff. But in our case, Janice Mills, our main Attorney General, said that we had no grounds for a suit. He would consider taking the case, but only if we could find a Maine law firm that would ascertain that we had legal standing in Maine. So, at this point, I would like to have Noreen Patient stand. Noreen Patient over here is with Eaton and Peabody, and she's done a fabulous job in her research of this case. So she's going to be on hand afterwards, because we're really not lawyers, any of us. We've done a lot of research, and we've done a lot of legwork. But if there's we have her here tonight, so that if there's something that we can't handle, she's going to back us up. So we're very happy that we got in touch with her. So
I added Tom Berry as contact.
oh, absolutely. Endless hours for Tom Berry on this too, volunteer time, and Tom Tavner. Tom Tavner went with us when we went to the governor's office and did a fine job representing us. And Tom Berry has always been at our right hand with any questions that we've had to ask. And so I thank both of them on a local level, and they have not asked for one penny. So they're both really, really helped us out there. Well, it's my pleasure now to introduce Val Young. And she's going to review Peabody's results. Okay.
Thank you. So first of all, I am horrified to do public speaking. So I apologize if I start to sweat profusely. And secondly, over the last 14 months, healthcare has become a large part of my daily conversation. I did not think that my 30th birthday party would be spent discussing reimbursement and critical access status and all of these great things that all of us have heard about and learned about in the last year. I'm privileged to be part of it. And so right now I'm going to explain what Noreen and her team told us at the end of our legal search. And these terms are new to me, as they will be new to many of you, and at the end she'll be available to answer questions. But I just wanted to go over what they described to us to try to find standing in the state of Maine. So we sought out these two lawyers with two legal remedies or goals in mind. The first was to prevent the closure of our emergency department at St. Andrews. The second was to regain control of St. Andrews Hospital. So in order to stop the closure, we would have to file a motion in court for an injunction or a temporary restraining order. According to law, anyone who would like to file an injunction of this kind would need to meet the following 4 criteria. 1, the party must demonstrate that it will suffer irreparable injury if the injunction is not granted. 2, such injury by the plaintiff must outweigh any harm inflicted to the defendant with the granting of the injunction. 3, there must be a likelihood of success on the merits of the case. At the very least, a substantial possibility that the plaintiff would eventually prevail in court. And 4, the public interest will not be adversely affected by granting the injunction. If the plaintiff fails to meet even one of these criteria, the injunction cannot be granted. So on top of meeting all 4 criteria, the plaintiff must also bring with them the complaint or the eventual lawsuit that will be filed and proof that it will prevail in that lawsuit. The proof cannot be speculative. It must include facts shown by affidavit sworn under oath. So we would have to meet all of these criteria, bring our full case before the judge, and that judge would have to say, yes, we think that plaintiff will win in a court case, and so we will grant them the injunction. So in order to obtain the temporary restraining order, we'd have to outline our case with the judge, and we can't state what might happen if the emergency room closes. It must be absolute fact in order to meet the irreparable injury criterion. We would also have to show that this proven irreparable injury to the community would outweigh the fiscal harm done to Lincoln County Healthcare by forcing it to keep the emergency room open. On top of all of those requirements, the plaintiff is also usually required to post a bond against any damages likely to be incurred by the other party if the defendant would ultimately prevail in court. So you can imagine what the size of the bond might amount to if Lincoln County Healthcare would be required to keep the ER open for any length of time past October 1. This bond is not the kind that's insured. You do pay a portion in the beginning in order for it to be posted in full, but should it need to be paid out at the end, we would be responsible for the full bond amount. So before we could file an injunction, we had to make sure that we had a case, and we had to make sure that that case would have a cause of action, the reason to file a lawsuit. We also examined the elements of each action, which is the proof we would need to bring with us, and we pinpointed who the plaintiff would be in each cause of action, and then our lawyers helped us to judge the likelihood of success for each of these causes of action. So the first cause of action that we looked at was the breach of fiduciary duty. Under this cause, we would need to prove a fiduciary relationship exists. This would mean showing that one party placed trust and confidence in another, and that a disparity of position and influence between the parties existed. In this case, the likely breach of trust would be between Maine Health, Lincoln County Healthcare, and their boards of trustees, and between us, the community members, and the patients. Our lawyers examined the recent case of Lifespan, where the United States District Court found that the healthcare network owed a fiduciary duty to the nonprofit hospital. In that case, there were clear facts that the CFO of the healthcare network was engaged in egregious acts and omissions that misled their board of directors to act in a way that was not best for their patients. In our case, there's no clear evidence that Maine Health, Lincoln County Healthcare, or the combined boards of directors did anything to amount to a breach of fiduciary duty. There is absolutely no proof, or unfortunately no proof, that misrepresentations were made about the combined governance of the Board of Miles and the Board of St. Andrews. In fact, as you heard, they were made up of exactly equal numbers in 2007. And there is no absolute proof that the management teams made misrepresentations or gave false information to the board members, who then voted to shut down the services. So without having any evidence that could be sworn under oath that happened, this is not a likely cause of action for us to pursue. So, there's more. We moved on to the next possible cause of action. Our lawyers explored possible federal and state antitrust claims. Antitrust laws can include claims based on unlawful restraints on trade, monopoly power, predatory conduct, use of market power to exclude a competitor from the market, all kinds of nasty things. When a healthcare network such as Maine Health wants to acquire a subsidiary, such as Miles and such as St. Andrews, it can file a certificate with the Attorney General to protect itself against such antitrust claims. There's no evidence that this was actually done by Maine Health, either for Miles or St. Andrews when it acquired us. So in this case, Maine Health and Lincoln County Healthcare would be our defendant, and the consumers of the Boothbay region market would be the plaintiff. We could seek monetary damages, and we could do monopoly busting, which would dismantle the monopoly over our healthcare in Lincoln County. However, there's a 4-year statute of limitations for federal claims and a 6-year statute of limitations for state claims. We affiliated with Maine Health in 1997, puts us well past the limit for this claim. Furthermore, St. Andrews could not claim that Miles and Maine Health are conspiring against us or working against us because we're considered a single entity. And within the eyes of the law, a single entity can't conspire against itself. So, antitrust laws were out. But we didn't give up. We looked at another possible cause of action relating to the residents of the St. Andrews Village. The village was opened in early 2000, consists of 25 cottage units owned by the St. Andrews Village Association. Residents purchase a share of stock in the association representing the value of their home. Marketing materials for these units were examined, and it was found that having access to a full continuum of healthcare services at St. Andrews Hospital was touted, along with the fact that the Gregory Wing is sponsored by St. Andrews Hospital, just minutes away in Boothbay Harbor. Under part of the village contract, it even lists access to acute care. So you can imagine that we hoped that the residents might be able to provide us with some possible viable cause of action. And our lawyers offered up negligent misrepresentation. They looked at the Maine Unfair Trade Practices Act, and again at the breach of fiduciary duty. For the negligent misrepresentation, the plaintiffs would be the village residents who purchased their homes in the small time frame between when the initial consideration to close the emergency room started, which we believe was February 2012, when the Navigant report started being created, and the announcement of the closure of the hospital in July 2012. Within this small window would be the defendants that would be the plaintiffs that purchased their house in that small window, and the defendants would be actually the village board and Lincoln County Healthcare. In this case, monetary damages could be claimed, perhaps in the amount of the loss of value of those cottages. But even if this route was successful for those owners who purchased their house in that time frame, our community would not be seeing the ER remain open. In looking at the Maine Unfair Trade Practice Act, we go again to the burden of proof on unfair methods of competition or deceptive acts or practices. And again, with this route, a village resident can claim monetary damages, what the real estate would have been worth versus what it is worth now with the ER closed. But the relief that we could get from court could be as little as asking the marketing materials to discontinue talk of a hospital down the street. And again, the order to keep the ER open would not be granted. And when looking at a breach of trust as it relates to the village, in this case, the board of the village would be the ones with the fiduciary duty to the residents. There is no evidence that this board even considered closing the ER or had a vote to close the ER. So in this case, the St. Andrews Village Board didn't misrepresent anything to its village residents. So this didn't stop us. We still looked at other causes of action. We're starting to get to the bottom of the list. We looked at the possibility of taxpayers and donors at St. Andrews bringing a lawsuit. As you all know, the closure of the ER has brought on additional tax burden to our communities through the increase of appropriation to our Boothbay Region Ambulance Service to the tune of close to $300,000. But as we have come to realize, the community has had no control over our health care services. Because our tax dollars do not go to the nonprofit organization that run our hospital, and because we did not have a say in the closure of our hospital, ironically, there is no legal connection of the taxpayer to the hospital. But there could be for the many who donated to St. Andrews Hospital over the years, and our lawyers were given materials regarding charitable gifts to St. Andrews. However, they did not find any specific information on gifts that were provided with conditions to keep the emergency room open, or gifts that were earmarked solely for the emergency room. Even if we had, the likely relief would be for Lincoln County Healthcare to simply return those gifts. So we were coming to the end of line for causes of action. We looked into the land donation by the Gregory family, but as Patty mentioned earlier, in the deed dated February 5th, 1958, it does not contain any restrictions on how the land must be used. So that brings us back to the beginning and the causes of action and what we need to bring an injunction. We know that there will likely be irreparable harm suffered. Unfortunately, from a legal standpoint, we cannot bring this as evidence. Though Maine Health can certainly provide a long list of expenditures made and decisions reached to close our hospital. So, even if we were able to meet all of these 4 criteria for an injunction to stop the closure of our emergency department, we'd be forced to put up a substantial bond to move forward with the lawsuit. And, as we've highlighted, it is unlikely that our causes of action would be successful. So, thank you to our lawyers for doing such a good job going through all the paperwork. But being unable to identify a viable cause of action, they did not recommend commencing a lawsuit.
Okay, questions on anything we've said so far? And if you have questions, incredible job summarizing all of that. And you can imagine how we all felt. 10 of us from the board went and sat in the lawyer's office as they went through this with us. And when we walked in, Bernie Kubik said, we are not going to rush you. We're going to give you this information. You can ask us as many questions as you want. We will stay here all night. And we stayed for 4 hours going through all of this. And when we walked out, we were, we walked in being unoptimistic. We didn't think we had a case, but we walked out pretty depressed. So, what questions do we have? Yes?
I was going to say, the article that showed up in the paper written by Mr. Donovan, the last paragraph was just unbelievable because he makes the outlandish statement to me, not worried, and they're not worried because they're not worried about people in the hospital. He says, after all, we're not really worried about the people in the hospital. Our job, is to keep them out of the hospital. I mean, it was the most convoluted paragraph I have ever read, and I don't know how many of you get Consumer Reports, but it says, rate your hospital in your state. Miles came in almost last in the state of Maine. And that kind of thinking, I can really understand why, and it made me really angry that that was his kind of conclusion of this whole thing. After all, don't worry, yeah, this is just a tragedy.
Yes.
Who's going to pay for the added admins?
Who's going to pay for the added admins? Oh, the added ambulances. We are. And that's actually, we have...
What is it for?
It's, we know that Scott Lash will be coming up shortly to talk about what we do next, but we do know that the beefing up our ambulance service, including going from volunteer to paid employees, is going to cost us $400,000 a year, we the taxpayers, and $400,000 a year. And this year, Lincoln County Healthcare did 2 things to mitigate that. They gave $250,000 to 3 of the towns, total $250,000 divided up by the 3 towns, and they also provided some training for some of the ambulance people. But there's no guarantee that they will be doing that next year. That's one of the things that we as community members and we, the foundation, as watchdogs, need to keep going back and saying, this isn't okay, we need more.
All right, then why did from St. Andrews divorce themselves from all this Maine Health and start over?
Well, that, as I said at the very beginning, so the question was, why doesn't St. Andrews divorce itself from Maine Health and start over? And I think all of us would love to be able to do that.
Why can't we?
We can't do it because the boards have to vote. Both the board of St. Andrews, which is now 22 people, of whom 6 live on this peninsula, and many of the board members actually work for Lincoln County Healthcare. So they're not likely to vote to dissolve that agreement. And Maine Health would also have to vote. So the way the agreement was set up back in 1997, both boards, the majority of both boards have to agree to dissolve the agreement, and they haven't. And we can keep lobbying them. We've been talking to them individually. We've been writing them letters. We can still keep trying. But right now, that hasn't worked. Try, just make sure we have some other names. Howard.
Howard Wright. I was on the board back when we were starting about St. Andrews Village.
Do you want to come up here, Howard? Just because I don't have a portable mic, I'm afraid. Your voice isn't quite as loud.
No problem here. I was on the board during the time when we were exploring going with Maine Med. Also to build St. Andrews Village, and there was talk of building an expressway right from the village to the hospital. Direct road, not going through town or anything like that. Thanks to Dr. Andrews, I was the first mental health clinician on the staff. And we have a neat community board. Now, what I'm understanding, and no pun intended, that the ER is dead on arrival.
That's right.
Is there any way that we can go in another direction? I mean, once we lose that, whatever it is, critical access, is there any way that we as a community can start off on our own and create something?
Yes, absolutely.
And have our own board?
Yes, and that's what we want to do.
That's, amen.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I think we've all learned from this experience that we don't want to have somebody else in charge anymore. We need to be in control of our health care. Yes. Do you have one more comment?
I just tell you, the new people that are going to be hired for the ambulance need that we have, is this going to be, we're going to have a much different type of ambulance because I've been a patient being driven in the ambulance. They couldn't even give pain shots. I mean, as somebody from Southport.
Right. So I'm going to ask Scott Black to come up at this point to address those questions. But does anybody have? Thank you for bringing that up. We're going to move to that as a logical segue. But there are some other questions still about the legal. Yeah.
Just a question, how are the members of the board elected on the 2 hospitals?
The board of of St. Andrews and Miles and Lincoln County Healthcare, which is now kind of merging into Lincoln County Health, are elected the same way most nonprofit boards are, which is there's a governance committee on the board, and they nominate like-minded people to fill whatever slots they have available, and then those board members have to be approved by Maine Health. So each board member serves at the pleasure of Maine Health. So it's unlikely that any ringers would actually get on the board. And right now, as I mentioned, their board is very heavy with doctors. And as we talked to many of the current board members who made the decision in 2012, they said that part of the reason that they voted, those people who did, many of our friends here on the peninsula did not vote to close the ER, to be fair, but of the people who did, they did so because they were convinced by Mark Foray and some of the other physicians that it really was safer to go to Miles for your emergency service than it was to stay here. they weren't lied to, they just weren't given all of the facts. And we just couldn't, there's just not enough there to make a legal case against that. Mark, did you have somebody else over here? Oh, Skip, yeah.
Can you cover that relationship between Afghanistan and Lincoln County numbers?
Actually, it was Judy Stone who came up with that one, and I put the wrong 0 in, so Jim Donovan called me on that. But basically, it has to do with the fact that the 25 beds that we now have, the 25 hospital beds that we now have for Lincoln County, for all of Lincoln County, that's 25, if you use that ratio of 25 beds, or beds per 1,000 people, and you look at the seasonal population prorated, so you don't just take the year-round people, but you add the seasonal people who are here for 5 months of the year, and add them in, which is what Donovan didn't do, then the number of beds per 1,000 is 0.04. And in most of Maine, it's 2.5. And in Afghanistan, it's 0.4. Sorry, 0.4, not 0.04. Right. Yes.
Yeah, in the discussions that you had with the 5 different attorney firms, was the issue of fraud ever brought up, and was it an option to pursue on the part of the attorneys?
So the question is, was the issue of fraud ever brought up? And were you thinking of a particular kind of fraud, John? I know...
misrepresentation,
Yeah.
deception on the part of Lincoln County Health, deception on the part of Maine Health, deception on the part of the officers or the management of...
I'm going to ask Maureen to try to answer that. She was kind enough to come.
Good evening. When we were first approached by Patty in early August, we were tasked with trying to come up with any possible cause of action, regardless of who the plaintiff might be. What cause of action could the community have, could individual people within the community have? And fraud is definitely one of them. The issue with fraud, though, is that it's very fact-intensive. You have to have the facts to back it up. And the issue that we have had is none of us were in the room. We weren't in the board meetings. We don't know what was said. We don't know what was provided. We don't know what documents they reviewed, what representations were made to them. So absent that knowledge, absent knowing someone who's in the room who's willing to come forward and say, I was lied to, I was told this fact led me to vote to close the ER or share governance or whatever the decision was, and had I not been lied to, I wouldn't have made that decision. So that is something, when we talked earlier about you need affidavits from people who are in the know, who know the facts, and will sign an affidavit, come and testify in a court of law, and say this misrepresentation was made. And it's my understanding from the people on the board who we have talked to is that they do second guess themselves. They wish they had asked more questions. They wish they had probed more. But they did not feel that they had been lied to. Looking back, and you have to understand, the first decision here was made in 1997. That was the real decision that started this all moving. So of course, hindsight is always 20/20, and people wish they had done things differently. But they could not say, I was lied to, this was misrepresented to me. I was required to have this information and no one gave it to me. And without that, we certainly couldn't show anything like fraud, where you have to prove by clear and convincing evidence.
I don't know how many people are on the peninsula, but it seems to me there are probably 4,000 or 5,000, and I would imagine the majority of them, at one point in time or another, felt that they were lied to by St. Andrews or by Lincoln County Health.
Well, the issue is really, it's a board decision. Because again, this goes back to the whole, this is a private corporation. It's not a community hospital. It's not run by tax dollars. So in a corporation, it's run like a business. And so you have a board of directors, and they're tasked with making decisions for the fiscal health and the continued health of the corporation that they serve. So it really comes down to what the board of directors were told and how they went about their decision making. As far as individual community members, because it's not a public hospital, it's a corporation.
Yes, but they're communicating with the public. It doesn't matter if it's a corporation or if it's a con man or what it is. If we're told one thing and it's not true, that's fraud.
I understand, and believe me, I don't like coming in here. Bear of bad news to all of you good people. All I could do is look at what is a legal cause of action in a court of law. I'm not suggesting that people still can't be outraged by the decision that was made, disagree with the decision that was made, or disagree with how it was communicated to the public, because I think most people would agree that was done poorly. But I had to look at a legal cause of action, and that is not great.
Thank you, Marie. Yes.
If we could get the votes of the Miles with the votes of the directors of St. Andrews, Miles would certainly vote for us to split away, because then they wouldn't have to worry. They got the 25 beds.
No, the problem is that now they're married to us even more, because the only way they get that Medicare reimbursement is by having St. Andrews essentially relocate to Miles. So we're moving our hospital to Miles, essentially. Okay, yes.
I may have missed it or something, a clarification on this board business. Early on in the presentation, it said that the board, you can break its affiliation by a unanimous vote of either board.
Both.
How did the St. Andrews board vote?
Both boards. Well, first of all, somebody would have to bring a motion. One of the board members would have to bring a motion to the board that they wanted to dissolve it.
One of the St. Andrews board members could make the motion, can't
They could, but nobody has.
Nobody in St. Andrews has made a motion?
Nobody on the St. Andrews board.
Well, what the hell kind of a board is that?
What if we get a board that's decent?
Who elected that board?
So I think you're poking at the right thing, and I don't think, I think there's still
Who
a
elected that
possibility
board?
that we could convince the
Who
board.
elected that board?
Talk to the board members. Yeah.
No one had them talk to them.
But they're the St. Andrews board members, right?
There are St. Andrews board members, they are also Lincoln County Health board members, and they are also Miles Memorial board members.
But their responsibility under that affiliation, they've shirked their responsibility?
Well, they feel that they've done the best they can to keep the hospitals viable by optimizing around reimbursement. So they made a very different decision than those of us who are sitting in this room.
They sound like a board of bankmates. They invite all their friends and they put them on the board, they give them $100,000 apiece and
No, they don't get any money. That's the other thing that we
they
discovered.
get other things. Another question I have, the law firms you mentioned,
Yes.
because it looks to me as St. Andrews made a lot of legal mistakes on this thing. Some of them they made probably in good faith. Some of them they made because they were so anxious to get their charter and their bank. But I don't know who they had for a lawyer, but they made some terrible mistakes. They opened the door a mile wide and they got blasted. Now, when you went to these law firms, because now you're down to two things, morality and politics.
Yes.
Now, I'm very surprised that you didn't go to one of the firms in Maine that are really known as heavy hitters in the political world.
Yes.
Scribner and Iverson, for instance.
Well, one of the problems we had in finding a law firm that would talk to us is if that law firm does any business with Maine Health, they can't do business with us. And there are only a handful of law firms in the state of Maine who don't have Maine Health as a client.
You said they can't do business with
They
us?
can't. That would be a conflict of interest.
Well,
for them.
what's the conflict?
The conflict is a lawyer can't take
I'm missing something again. Scribner and Iverson is a conflict?
I believe so. I believe Maine Health is one of their clients.
And Pacious and Belleville are a conflict?
Again, I don't recall all of the ones we talked to.
The point I'm making, that's the law firm of George Nissen, all right? Now, there's some political clout there.
Yeah.
So you know the old business, if you're losing the legal argument, use the other
Right.
argument.
Well, remember, we also went to the governor, to our state senators and representatives.
You went to this governor, did you read it to him in crayon?
Yeah. We have also gone to our federal senators and representatives, and they are going to Medicare as well. So we're still working the political angle, and I'd love to talk to you afterwards and get the names
Well,
of...
just because of some of my experience in life, I think what you have to do now, you have to get a guy that really knows his way around this kind of thing. Because if you've got so many things against you, you now need a wheeler dealer.
Yeah, I agree. So if you have one to suggest, then I'll write it down later. I think we need to move on. It's 8:30, and we want to make sure that we get you guys out of here by 9. So I know there's one more question. I'm going to ask Scott if you wouldn't mind coming down to the front, and we'll go ahead and move on, and we'll have some time. We're happy to stick around afterwards and talk to any of you individually. But I asked Scott and Robbie, Scott Lash and Robbie Han from our Boothby Regional Ambulance Service to answer this question that I'm standing in the middle of. Now what do we do? So, let's get the slide.
At least this will lower you to cover of the financial report for Lincoln County Health. If you want to talk about lawsuits, that's a good one right there. I first want to start off by, and I don't need your mouth this, sorry. You'll never see me karaoke, that's for sure. I want to start off first of all by thanking the community for supporting our budget. It was a huge increase, something that we didn't take away when we developed it, something when the board voted on it, they took very, very seriously and were concerned about it. We know that the position that we were put in is not sustainable for taxpayers to continue at this level in the future. Luckily this year, from our understanding, and I want to phrase it that way, our understanding is that Lincoln County Healthcare was able to contribute some sort of funding to the towns. We backed away from the table very early on negotiating that because that could put us in violation of any Medicare laws. So what we did was as soon as we started talking about some of the financial aspects of what Lincoln County Healthcare could do to offset the increase in our costs, we stood back after we had an attorney advise us, Pageworth and Wolfberg in Pennsylvania, and they're the nationally known firm that advises ambulance services on reimbursement issues with Medicare particularly. In fact, they do most of the sample and draft policies in order to address some of the concerns that ambulances have for Medicare. So I'll touch on a few things from that statement. Part of our budget was driven by the desire to give all of our patients the choice of which hospital they would like to go to, whether it be Miles or Midcoast. We have heard loud and clear that is a decision that they want to have to be able to choose between the two hospitals. Now keep in mind there are two things that drive that. Number one is the nature of the call. If we have someone that's critically injured, critically ill, we're going to be hard-pressed to take them to a hospital that's another 10, or even in some cases 15 miles more down the road than Miles Hospital. So that's the first hurdle that we have to pass, to honor a request to a hospital that's further away than Miles in Damariscotta. The second hurdle to kind of get through is what is our day looking like as far as call volume, and what are our resources that we have back in town? Because we don't want to take the only paramedic or the only ALS crew if we're having, for example, windjammer days. And we have a lot of call jeopardy with coverage. So those are the two hurdles that we need to address in our budget and want to address in our budget and want to address in our staffing mix to make sure that when you call us and you want to go to a hospital that's not MIDCO's, that we can do our very best to honor that request. Fortunately, our staff is experienced enough to handle that kind of distance. I'm not concerned about that at all. I'm not concerned. We have, I calculated, we have over 400 years of experience with our staff, which is a wealth of knowledge and ability to provide to any community. What I'm more concerned about is the backfill. It's what happens to the second person that calls 911. That's what I'm most concerned about, and that's what our budget is trying to address. And that's also what our staffing is going to address, and we need to hire more people. Unfortunately, for a long time, this community enjoyed the benefit of having a local ED. So that meant that the turnaround time from an ambulance, from one call to the next, could be as little as 30 to 40 minutes. Now that's going to be 2 hours. So, and that's not to mean that we can't respond back if we get to Edgecombe and there's another call. Some of those response times are no different than if the ambulance was at the station. So, but you have to remember that this community is all structured on, everything is on the peninsula. Everything's on the peninsula. So if we did have a second call, or we did have a lot of activity that day, we could turn around ambulances very quickly and really have no impact with needing outside staffing. So as volunteers dropped off, as people realized that the commitment for this has changed, and the expertise has increased, we've had to rely on the same people over and over and over again. And those people are now a smaller group covering the same amount of area. So now we have to look for the last few years outside the area to hire people in to cover town, which if you're in a job, you're not going to travel 20, 40, 50 miles to come and volunteer. You want to do it as a job, which is what EMS has turned into. Is employment. It's what people do as a career now. So now we're faced with transitioning the service from a volunteer or a paid volunteer or a call-in type situation to where we need to retain staff to bring them into the community to cover. And even if we did come up with, usually takes about 10 to 12 people to put on an EMT class, for example, that process is about a year away. And for each student, it's about a $650 tuition. So we're looking at quite a lot of money to even begin to do that. So this is what we're up against. This is what we're addressing in the last few months, trying to get through the final phase of this. I do want to make it very clear. I have heard in the community that some of the solution to bypass all of this is to just get in the car and drive to the ambulance station and meet the ambulance there. That's the worst and the wrong approach to take, for two reasons. Number one, it puts other people on the road at risk. Even though it sounds like a great idea, if someone is sick in the seat beside you, the adrenaline, the urgency is just going to increase to the point where you're an unsafe driver. Or if you're the driver yourself, you're putting somebody else at risk if your condition deteriorates on the road. The second thing is, if we're on a call already, there's not going to be anybody at the station. Another consideration is our dispatch center at Lincoln County is trained. They're certified in emergency medical dispatching, which is EMD, so they can give you pre-arrival instructions. Even though that dispatcher is asking you some questions, they're filling things into the computer, which is automatically dispatching us. We all have text paging, so we're getting the call in even before our radios are alerted in most cases. The other dispatcher is looking at their CAD screen and they're getting us on the road. So it may seem to you as a caller that they're asking all kinds of questions. Why aren't they dispatching the ambulance? It's already been done. They can tell you, for example, if you're having chest pain, to take some baby aspirin. If someone isn't breathing, how to open an airway, how to even start CPR. So those are important components that if you're driving to the station, you're going to miss out on. So make sure, call 911, access the system as it's designed, and we'll be there in no time. Our average response time for the whole peninsula is 8.5 minutes. That's not going to change where we have. that's not going to change. That part of the response time section isn't going to change. So, one of the things that we have done, we have worked with Lincoln County Healthcare to implement an iTablet project. We're the first ambulance in the state and one of the few in the country that have telemedicine that's built into our ambulances now. So we can turn on, look directly at the doctor can look directly at us, look at our patient, and can help us make better informed decisions as to what care needs to happen. Now, that project is starting to come online. We've been testing it the last few months. Because of our proximity to the hospital, it hasn't been something that has been utilized heavily, but as that changes, we'll use it more and more. That could drive us to make decisions. For example, maybe even Miles isn't the smart place to go, even Midcoast might not be the smart place to go. Maybe the ultimate patient care might be down at Maine Med directly. And because we have this capability, we can make that decision and bypass local hospitals and get directly down to Maine Med. That's something that's down the road. We have some training that we're doing with some generous funding from the Dory Taylor grant that will help us train our paramedics to the critical care level, which is a level that's not yet recognized in Maine, but it gives us an added training, even on emergency calls, to know what to do, so that when that training is approved as something that we can do, we'll be that much further ahead than some of the other services in the area. We're also working on a community paramedicine program. And the paramedicine program doesn't mean it's just paramedics. It's EMTs, intermediates, and paramedics. And that allows us to go out into the field, if that pilot is approved, and to work with patients directly in a non-emergency setting. Someone that's been discharged that may not be eligible for home health care, or the district nurse to come by. Someone that needs just an extra set of eyes and a review of their medications to help make sure that they stay home and they're not needing an ambulance in the middle of the night in a critical situation. So those are some of the things that kind of are all hitting us all at once, unfortunately, but we don't get to pick the circumstances that we're in sometimes. So as we see what the next few months brings to us and how this community is really impacted, instead of talking about it, when we actually see what's going to happen, these things will be starting to come online, and hopefully we'll be able to have a little bit better handle on providing care to the community like what we want to do.
So, questions for Scott. One thing I want to make sure we also say is that if you are not feeling well, but you don't think it's a 911 kind of emergency, you should call your primary care doctor on call. So all of the primary care docs have on call, and they will call you right back and talk to you. Okay.
Three-part question. What's your ideal staffing a year from now? What's the staffing going to be October 1st, and what are you going to do because of the difference?
The ideal staffing, what we're going to do October 1st, with the staff that we have additional hiring that we have to do, without question.
I want to know what's your ideal first? Where do you hope to be a year from now?
If anything will possible.
You've got to have a vision of where you're going.
We do. It just all depends on what the community is able to afford.
Now, what do you feel to do to provide the best possible service that you
Two crews around the clock. Two-man crews around the clock, which is what our budget is based on.
Okay, what are you going to have October 1st?
We're going to have 1.5.
Right, how are you going to solve the difference?
Additional hiring, which is what we started to do.
But how soon, and what are you going to do when you don't have the other half crew and you need it?
We're going to rely on mutual aid, which is what we do now. We have Dan Muscata, CLC, and also Wiscasset that we rely on to provide us with backup. We're also going to initially use the call staff that we have now, but that's not a long-range solution. As people have to return to work, that get called out, that will buy us some time for the short term until we do get additional staffing. It's not a situation unique to our community, though. It's all communities are going through a difficult time trying to find enough trained and ready EMTs and paramedics.
How does Lifeline fit into all this? And can they still use that heliport at St. Andrews?
Yeah, Lifelight will be able to land at the helicopter pad at St. Andrews.
What activates that?
We activate it when we either get the call or when we see what the type of the call is. But keep in mind that there are 2 helicopters in the state of Maine. And they're not only used for scene emergencies, but they're also used for transfers. For example, someone needs to go down to Boston for the burn center, someone that's up north that needs to come down to either Eastern Maine or to Portland. So that's why they've been doing some fundraising for the fixed wing program, so they can also have free up time for the helicopter. Now, some communities like Monhegan doesn't even have any sort of first responder ambulance service, so they rely exclusively on Lifelight to provide them with basic ambulance service. So if someone has a broken ankle, they're calling Lifelight, which ties up the helicopter. So it's not a system that is the ideal ultimate. We try to use them whenever possible. We meet them at the helicopter pad and work with them that way. It's something that's obviously going to expand, but keep in mind they're 2 helicopters for the state, and they're used quite heavily. So that's why our experience is going to have to come into play, and to make sure that we have what we need to transport to the closest hospital.
Thank you, but you can still use them, that's a little help though.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take 2 more, and then we need to.
I just want to clarify something I'm not sure I got right, that you said, when you are picking somebody up, that person has the choice of saying either Miles or Midcoast, or you make that decision?
Well, the patient has a choice to ask for it. Now, if there are some criteria that have to be met, absolutely, but sure. That's not something, unless Miles is on diversion or Midcoast is on diversion, which happens. One of the things that the critical access license is a 96-hour bed stay. So the average patient stay has to be 96 hours. So when you have these 25 beds, as patients need to get moved around, as the emergency room gets busy at either facility, they may have to divert. They may say that they can't accept patients right now because they're overwhelmed. And that happens at all the hospitals. And they get to that capacity where they're saturated.
Okay, one more. Okay.
What other funding models exist for ambulance services? Are all ambulances supported by the towns? We were talking about $400,000 that it's going to cost our towns in this peninsula. Are not some ambulance services commercial or otherwise funded in other ways?
A vast majority of the ambulance services in the country are actually part of the fire department. It's unique not to be part of the fire department, and that has happened as the public education for fire suppression has actually worked to the point where their volume is low and their funding is needing to take some other shape. They've pulled in EMS to offset their expenses and to use downtown for firemen. So in a community that doesn't have a full-time fire department already, then your choices are either private commercial enterprise, which is the same situation as any business model. It's driven by business decisions. So if there's not enough call volume, then they either cut back on the number of ambulances they have, or they pull out the contract after it's done. I've worked for privates. After a while, some of them can't stay in business because the reimbursement isn't there. The other model is something along the lines of what we're doing, which is a nonprofit and relies on community support to subsidize what the shortfall is from reimbursements and expenses. Now, what we're hoping to do is use some of this capacity that we have. For example, the average, like I just said, the average bed stay being 96 hours. That means that there's transfer work that we used to do out of St. Andrews that helped offset the budget, so our subsidy request was very minimal. We're hoping to pick up that same type of volume out of Miles, especially if we have the capacity to do critical care transports that other ambulances don't have, and try to recapture some of that money so that we're not relying so much on tax dollars, that we're actually using our skills to put money back into our program.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we just have a short piece we'd like to close with. I'm sure Scott and Robbie will be here if you have specific questions for them. And Dr. Stone, Dr. Judy Stone, you may remember as being one of the first very vocal people who stood up last August.
Thank you. The first thing I wanted to say, however, is a thanks to Patty and Jane and Margaret Parrott and all the other people who volunteered to try to save St. Andrews. As some of you may remember, I've been through this sort of scenario before, so I know how impressive their work has been, and they've done a better job than we did in Maryland, so thank you. But moving right along, you've heard what we've done to try to save St. Andrews, and have unfortunately heard that we can't. We have concerns now as to the ongoing level of commitment from Lincoln County Healthcare towards the peninsula, and do not want to be caught unprepared once again. Now we need to look forward, design and roll out an integrated healthcare and social services for our region. I want to emphasize that this must be community controlled and will aim to provide for the unmet needs on the peninsula, of which there are many. Services will be based on data, as the data from One Main Health, from surveys and from input from the community. We cannot again afford to be complacent and trusting. We must ensure that this doesn't happen again on our peninsula, and I want to emphasize you have to get involved in helping us shape healthcare in the region. Next slide. Yeah. Our goals are to provide readily available access and assistance when you need it. We'll be focusing on the unmet needs. We're not ready to divulge some of our detailed plans, given that some of our competitors are likely sitting here tonight, but we'll give you a preview. We're starting with several initiatives that have been framed by a strategic planning group. Members of the planning group include physicians, nurses, emergency medical professionals, mental health and substance abuse people, and experienced rural health care experts and administrators. Recommendations that will be to the foundation board and to the community will be based on needs assessments with input from the community. The Boothbay region faces special challenges that I want to emphasize to you. First, that Lincoln County has the oldest population of any county in the country. 21% of the people here are over 65 years old versus 13% nationally. So a huge difference. And that's part of why I've been so concerned about there being so few beds when Miles gets the critical access designation. We have the highest rates of former smokers, people with cancer, especially cancer of the bladder, breast, prostate, and melanoma. We have high rates of heart disease and stroke, and a high incidence of early onset diabetes. Among ages 18 through 44, it's 6.3% in Lincoln County versus 2.9% in the rest of Maine. There's a somewhat lower rate of childhood immunizations here. There are particularly difficult challenges in mental health and substance abuse. Again, Lincoln County, unfortunately, has the highest percentage in the state of alcohol and substance abuse, despite it being such a gorgeous place. It's 8.7%, almost twice what it is in the rest of Maine, which is 4.7% in adult. Youth alcoholism is high, as is the number of young teenagers who have considered suicide and admissions and who have admissions for depression. There's an undertreated treatment of mental health issues in the county. However, the region also has a large number of assets with strong volunteer-run resources, including Alcoholics Anonymous, Domestic Violence Hotline, Community Resource Council, Social Navigator, from local churches, Food Pantry, Meals on Wheels, community church lunches, rent and housing assistance, including firewood and fuel, the fish transportation to medical appointments, the clothing at church, scholarships, the school backpack program, which I think is really a wonderful idea, among many others that you all do. So with that brief preview, Patty is going to resume to tell you a little bit more about specifics.
I know we're right against it, and time-wise, so again, it's just a quick highlight. But the things we're most excited about are we're going to be doing separate meetings basically every month. I think it'll probably be the second or third Thursday of each month, so we can do a deep dive in each one of these. And one of the ones we're ready to roll out pretty quickly is Chip Teal's program, Full Circle America, which is what he calls elder empowerment. And the idea is that people who are elderly or disabled, who might otherwise end up in a nursing home, can stay in their homes with virtual monitoring, with video camera, discrete video cameras, not in your bedroom or your bathroom, but in the kitchen and other public, living room, kitchen, and a volunteer network of people who will be available to take you to a cribbage game or a concert, not just medical appointments. So the whole support network that Chip Teal has put in place is very cost effective compared to being in a nursing home. It's about $500 a month as opposed to several thousand in a nursing home. The outcomes are much, much higher in terms of the quality of life and the condition that people stay in and their happiness. And it's a program that's already up and running. He's got over 1,000 patients in it now. It's viable. It's working in Damascus. We just want to roll it out here. So we're planning to do that this year, and we're hoping that by June we will have about 20 clients. We need a full-time coordinator. This is actually a job opening. A full-time coordinator who will be able to serve these patients and coordinate with all these different social services agencies and any volunteers, including the elderly people themselves who want to help each other. And so that we're very excited about it. We'll be having Chip come probably in a couple of weeks, and we'll get you information about that. The other thing we want to really focus on is youth at risk. And Smith, are you still in the room? Smith Kleino? No, he had to leave. Okay, well, the good news is that Smith Kleino, who was part of our task force, is now and has a great background in helping kids at risk in juvenile detention, has now taken a job, actually created a job for himself in the Booth Bay school system. So he's going to be our point person in the schools, both primary school, secondary school, and secondary school, to identify kids who need help early, whether it's mental health issues, substance abuse, family problems, whatever, and also work with us to determine what are the services that the community doesn't yet have, or what services are here but are underfunded, or how do we bolster that. So we're really going to focus on the elderly population and on the kids at risk. And then mental health and substance abuse services. You'll see if you read through our board profiles, we have people on the board who are very, very strong in actually running and rolling out programs for substance abuse and mental health. And as you heard from Judy, this is a really big problem. And then we're planning to start a health insurance education program, starting with a talk on the health insurance exchange, and then from each of the health insurance providers. So those of you who need to decide what health insurance you want to opt for, we're going to have that information available to you in workshops between now and the end of the year. And then the final piece is what we want you to help us with. And Howard, you, I think, were the one who walked up here and said, okay, so they're closing down our ER, and they're taking away our beds. We need to create something new here. And that is exactly what we want to do. And we want your help. And our idea is that it's community designed and community run and community sponsored. And nobody will be able to take it away from us. So I'd love to, we'll have again another session in which we'll do a deep dive into what are our requirements for that, what do we really need locally, and over the next few months, hopefully pretty quickly, we'll be able to nail that. We've already actually started working on it, but we need your input. So basically, what we need is your help to design, to volunteer, to contribute, and to lead your, tell us what the priorities are. So thank you very much for coming out. Jane has a couple of words she'd like to say in closing. We really appreciate your hanging in here.
Well, we can put that 4-page thing right to bed. This is just a wonderful story, and I think we all need something that will make us feel good right about now. There were a group of 30 of us or so that wrote letters to state representatives and legislators and to our federal representatives as well. And I'm in my shop and I'm cutting hair and the phone rings and I answer it, and it was Matthew Chandler. He's director of Health and Human Services, the Rural Health Department. And he said, I needed to call you today. And I said, great, what's going on? I got your letter. He said, I want you to know it will not fall on deaf ears. And he said, I have another woman's letter here. Wait a minute, I've got to go over to my desk and get it. So he went over to the desk, he came back. He said, do you know a so-and-so? I said, I do. He said, do me a favor. Will you call her as well and tell her, I have her letter. It will not fall on deaf ears. I can't do anything for you in this department, but I will turn it on to my boss, Sheila Panett, and she, in turn, will pass it on to Mary Mayhew, who is the commissioner. And I said, terrific. He said, I have one more thing to say to you. I said, go ahead. I would love to live in your community. This is why. This is an old town hall, and this is community. This is rural community. We're going to keep going. We're not giving up.
Thank you.
There are a few things that are unfinished business. But I want to thank you all for writing letters. I want to thank you for putting money in our boxes. I want to thank you for joining our foundation. We're excited. We've learned a lot. We've learned a ton. Nobody in our group knew what a critical access hospital was a year ago. And we've got a foundation up and going. And we are going to provide health needs for people in the community. So join us, support us, and thank you for your